Reading the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Volume 1. Introduction. Our Master and His Message. In the 4 volumes of the works of the Swami Vivekananda, which are to compose the present edition, we have what is not only a gospel to the world at large, but also to its own children, the charter of the Hindu faith. What Hinduism needed amidst the general disintegration of the modern era was a rock where she could lie at anchor, an authoritative utterance in which she might recognize herself. And this was given to her in these words and writing of the Swami Vivekananda. For the first time in history, as had been said elsewhere, Hinduism itself forms here the subject of generalization of a Hindu mind of the highest order. For ages to come, the Hindu man who would verify, the Hindu mother who would teach her children what was the faith of their ancestors, will turn to the pages of these books for assurance and light. Long after the English language has disappeared from India, the gift that has here been made through that language to the world will remain and bear its fruit in East and West alike. What Hinduism had needed was the organizing and consolidating of its own idea. What the world had needed was a faith that had no fear of truth. Both these are found here. Nor could any greater proof have been given to the eternal vigor of the Sanatan Dharma, of the fact that India is as great in the present as ever in the past, than this rise of the individual who, at the critical moment, gathers up and voices the communal consciousness. That India should have found her own need satisfied only in carrying to the humanity outside her borders the bread of life is what might have been foreseen. Nor did it happen on this occasion for the first time. It was once before in sending out to the sister lands the message of a nation making faith that India learned as a whole to understand the greatness of her own thought, a self unification that gave birth to modern Hinduism itself. Never may we follow it to be forgotten that on Indian soil first was heard the command from a teacher to his disciple, "Go ye out into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." It is the same thought, the same impulse of love, taking to itself a new shape, that is uttered by the lips of Swami Vivekananda, when to a great gathering in the West he says, "If one religion be true, then all the others must also be true. Thus the Hindu faith is yours as much as mine." And again, in amplification of the same idea, we Hindus do not merely tolerate. We unite ourselves with every religion, praying in the mosque of the Muhammad, worshipping before the fire of the Zoroastrians, and kneeling to the cross of the Christians. We know that all religions alike, from the lowest fetishism to the highest absolutism, are but so many attempts of the human soul to grasp and realize the infinite. So we gather all these flowers and, binding them together with the cord of love, make them into a wonderful bouquet of worship. To the heart of the speaker, none was foreign or alien. For him, there existed only humanity and truth. Of the Swami's address before the Parliament of Religions, it may be said that when he began to speak, it was of the religious ideas of the Hindus. But when he ended, Hinduism had been created. The moment was ripe with this potentiality. The vast audience that faced him represented exclusively the Occidental mind, but included some development of all that in this was most distinctive. Every nation in Europe has poured in its human contribution upon America, and notably upon Chicago, where the Parliament was held. Much of the best, as well as some of the worst, of modern effort and struggle, it is at all times to be met with within the frontiers of that Western civic queen, whose feet are upon the shores of Lake Michigan, as she sits and broods with the light of the North in her eyes. There is very little in the modern consciousness, very little inherited from the past of Europe, that does not hold some outpost in the city of Chicago. And while the teeming life and eager interests of that center may seem to some of us for the present largely a chaos, yet they are undoubtedly making for the revealing of some noble and slow route ideal of human unity, when the days of their ripening shall be fully accomplished. Such was the psychological area, such the sea of mind, young, tumultuous, overflowing with its own energy and self assurance, yet inquisitive and alert within, which confronted Vivekanand when he rose to speak. Behind him, on the contrary, lay an ocean, calm with long ages of spiritual development. Behind him lay a world that dated itself from the Vedas and remembered itself in the Upanishads, a world to which Buddhism was almost modern, a world that was filled with religious systems of faith and creed, a quiet land steeped in the sunlight of the tropics, the dust of whose road had been trodden by the feet of the saints for ages upon ages. Behind him, in short, lay India, with her thousands of years of national development in which she had sounded many things, proved many things, and realized almost all, save only her own perfect unanimity, from end to end of her great expanse of time and space, as to certain fundamental and essential truths held by all her people in common. These, then, were the two mind floods, two immense rivers of thought, as it were, Eastern and modern, of which the yellow clad wanderer on the platform of the Parliament of Religions formed for a moment the point of confluence. The formulation of the common basis of Hinduism was the inevitable result of the shock of their contact in a personality so impersonal. For it was so for it was no experience of his own that rose to the lips of Swami Vivekananda there. He did not even take advantage of the occasion to tell the story of his master. Instead of either of these, it was the religious consciousness of India that spoke through him, the message of his whole people as determined by their whole past. And as he spoke in the youth and noonday of the West, a nation sleeping in the shadows of the darkened half of earth, on the far side of the Pacific, waited in spirit for for the words that would be born on the dawn that was traveling towards them, to reveal to them the secret of their own greatness and strength. Others stood beside the Swami Vivekananda on the same platform as he, as apostles of particular creeds and churches. But it was his glory that he came to preach a religion to which each of these was, in his own words, only a traveling, a coming up of different men and women through various conditions and circumstances to the same goal. He stood there as he declared to tell of one who had said of them all, not that one and another was true in this or that respect, or for this or that reason, but that all these are threaded upon me as pearls upon a string. Wherever thou set extraordinary holiness and extraordinary power, raising and purifying humanity, know thou I am there. To the Hindu, says Vivekanand, man is not traveling from error to truth, but climbing up from truth to truth, from truth that is lower to truth that is higher. This and the teaching of Mukti, the doctrine that man is to become divine by realizing the divine, that religion is perfected in us only when it has led us to Him who is the one life in a universe of death, Him who is the constant basis of an ever changing world, that one who's the only soul, of which all souls are but delusive manifestations, may be taken as the two great outstanding truths which, authenticated by the longest and most complex experience in human history, India proclaimed through him to the modern world of the West. For India herself, the short address forms, as has been said, a brief charter of enfranchisement. Hinduism in its wholeness, the speaker bases on the Vedas, but he spiritualizes our conception of the word even while he utters it. To him, all that is true is Veda. By the Vedas, he says, no books are meant. They mean the accumulated treasury of spiritual laws discovered by the different persons in different times. Incidentally, he discloses his conception of the Sanatan Dharma. From the high spiritual flights of the Vedanta philosophy, of which the latest discoveries of science seems like echoes, to the lowest ideas of idolatry, with its multifarious mythology, the agnosticism of the Buddhist and the atheism of the Jains, each and all have a place in the Hindu religion. To his mind, there could be no section, no school, no sincere religious experience of the Indian people. However, like an aberration, it might seem to the individual that might rightly be excluded from the embrace of Hinduism. And of this Indian mother church, according to him, the distinctive doctrine is that of the Ishta Devata, the right of each soul to choose its own path and to seek God in its own way. No army then carries the banner of so wide an empire as that of Hinduism thus defined. For as her spiritual goal is the finding of God, even so is her spiritual rule the perfect freedom of every soul to be itself. Yet would not this inclusion of all, this freedom of each, be the glory of Hinduism that it is, were it not for her supreme call of sweetest promise? Hear, you children of immortal bliss, even you that dwell in higher spheres, for I have found that ancient one who is beyond all darkness, all delusion, and knowing him, you shall also be saved from death. Here is the word for the sake of which all the rest exists and has existed. Here is the crowning realization into which all others are resolvable. When in his lecture on the work before us, the Swami adjures all to aid him in the building of a temple wherein every worshipper in the land can worship, a temple whose shrine shall contain only the word Om, there are some of us who catch in the utterance the glimpse of a still greater temple, India itself, the motherland as she already exists, and see the path not of the Indian churches alone, but of all humanity converging there at the foot of that sacred place wherein is set the symbol that is no symbol, the name that is beyond all sound. It is to this and not away from it that all the paths of all the worships and all the religious systems lead. India is at one with the most Puritan faiths of the world in her declaration that progress is from seen to unseen, from the many to the one, from the low to the high, from the form to the formless, and never in the reverse direction. She differs only in having a word of sympathy and promise for every sincere conviction, wherever and whatever it may be, as constituting a step in the great ascent. The Swami Vivekananda would have been less than he was had anything in this evangel of Hinduism been his own. Like the Krishna of the Gita, like Buddha, like Shankaracharya, like every great teacher that Indian thought has known, his sentences are laden with quotations from the Vedas and Upanishads. He stands merely as the revealer, the interpreter to India of the treasures that she herself possesses in herself. The truths he preaches would have been as true had he never been born. Nay, more, they would have been equally authentic. The difference would have lain in her difficulty to access, in their want of modern clearness and incisiveness of statement, and in their loss of mutual coherence and unity. Had he not lived, texts that today will carry the bread of life to thousands might have remained the obscure disputes of scholars. He taught with authority and not as one of the Pandits, for he himself had plunged to the depths of the realization which he preached, and he came back like Ramanuj, only to tell its secrets to the pariah, the outcast, and the foreigner. And yet, this statement that his teaching holds nothing new is not absolutely true. It must never be forgotten that it was Swami Vivekananda who, while proclaiming the sovereignty of the Advaita philosophy, as including that experience in which all is one, without a second, also added to Hinduism the doctrine that Advaita, Vaishnavata, and Advaita are but three phases or stages in the single development, of which the last named constitutes the goal. This is part and parcel of the still greater and more simple doctrine that the many and the one are the same reality, perceived by the mind at different times and in the different attitudes. Or, as Sri Ramakrishna expressed the same thing, God is both with form and without form, and He is that which includes both form and formlessness. It is this which adds its crowning significance to our Master's life, for here he becomes the meeting point, not only of the West and East, but also of past and future. If the many and the one be indeed the same reality, then it is not all modes of worship alone, but equally all modes of work, all modes of struggle, all modes of creation with our paths to realization. No distinction henceforth between sacred and secular. To labor is to pray, to conquer is to renounce. Life is itself religion. To have and to hold is as stern a trust as to quit and to avoid. This is the realization which makes Vivekananda great preacher of karma, not as divorced form, but as expressing jnana and bhakti. To him, the worship, the study, the farmyard, and the field are as true and fit scenes for the meeting of God with man as the cell of the monk or the door of the temple. To him, there is no difference between service of man and worship of God, between manliness and faith, between true righteousness and spirituality. All his words, from one point of view, read as a commentary upon his central conviction, art, science, and religion, he said once, are but three different ways of expressing a single truth. But in order to understand this, we must have the theory of Advaita. The formative influence that went to the determining of his vision may perhaps be regarded as threefold. There was first his literary education in Sanskrit and English. The contrast between the two worlds thus opened to him carried with it a strong impression of that particular experience, which formed the theme of the Indian sacred books. It was evident that this, if true at all, had not been stumbled upon by Indian sages, as by some others in a kind of accident. Rather, was it the subject matter of a science, the object of a logical analysis that shrank from no sacrifice which the pursuit of truth demanded. In his master Ramakrishna Paramhansa, living and teaching in the temple garden at Dakshineshwar, the Swami Vivekananda, Narain, as he then was found, that's verification of the ancient texts which his heart and his reason had demanded. Here was the reality which the books only brokenly described. Here was one to whom samadhi was a constant mode of knowledge. Every hour saw the swing of the mind from the many to the one. Every moment heard the utterance of wisdom gathered superconsciously. Everyone about him caught the vision of the divine. Upon the disciple came the desire for supreme knowledge as if it had been a fever. Yet he who was thus the living embodiment of the books was so unconsciously, for he had read none of them. In his Guru, Ramakrishna Paramhansa, Vivekananda found the key to life. Even now, however, the preparation for his own task was not complete. He had yet to wander throughout the length and breadth of India, from the Himalayas to Cape Comorin, mixing with saints and scholars and simple souls alike, learning from all, teaching to all, and living with all, seeing India as she was and is, and so grasping in its comprehensiveness that vast whole of which his master's life and personality had been a brief and intense epitome. These, then, the Shastras, the Guru, and the motherland, are the three notes that mingle themselves to form the music of the works of Vivekananda. These are the treasure which it is his to offer. These furnish him with the ingredients whereof he compounds the world's heal all of his spiritual bounty. These are the three lights burning within that single lamp which India by his hand lighted and set up for the guidance of her own children and of the world in a few years of work between September 19th, 1893 to 4th of July 1902. And some of us there are who, for the sake of that lighting and of this record that he had left behind him, bless the land that bore him and the hands of those who set him forth, and believe that not even yet has it even begun to us to understand the vastness and significance of the message that he spoke. July 4th, 1907.